Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel and welcome to Jessie Recommends, a series that I do every single Monday where I share a piece of art, a piece of media that really meant a lot to me, that influenced me, that has stuck with me over time for some reason or another. And today I am honestly so excited to be sharing this small little Indian Canadian horror movie that I'm going to be talking about, that I'll reveal in just a second if you haven't already cheated and looked at the thumbnail or the title of the video. You know, the things that you were supposed to check out before. Anyways, I'm not hyperbolicizing when I say that this movie is one of the most influential movies in my life. Now, I don't necessarily think it is one of the greatest movies of all time, but this movie just hits me so perfectly in terms of what I like about cinema, about what I like about movies, about the types of movies that I want to make and am inspired by, as well as it just coming at a particular time in my life where this movie honestly just changed the way that I thought about film and honestly influenced me wanting to go into being a creator, into going to film school, to going into media. So yeah, I don't mean to oversell it, but I will be talking about all of that in just a second because I am talking about a little indie Canadian horror movie called Cube. Now, for those of you who don't know what Cube is, let me just quick describe to you what this small little horror movie is all about. Cube basically follows a group of about 7 or 8 people who all wake up inside a giant cube made up of a bunch of smaller cubes. So they all wake up in these little cube rooms that have doors on each one of the walls. So there are 6 doors within each room, each leading to another different colored cube. Now, these survivors are trying to figure out their way out of the cube, obviously, trying to figure out how they got there and how to get out. But what they start to learn is that each new cube has different traps. Maybe one, if you step in it and you make a noise, it will shoot out spikes to kill you. Or maybe there'll be a flamethrower in it that will murder you. Definitely sort of that horror, sort of gruesome, torture porny Saw kind of thing going on in here. But that idea in of itself is just so much fun because each of the traps is different and some of the cubes are safe, and so all of these survivors are trying to figure out, like, how do we get out of the cube? How do we get out of this? What is there to do? And they start to learn that there are little clues to lead them to try to figure their way out of the cube, but I won't spoil exactly how or when that happens. So that right up front is just a true fun setup for a horror movie. It's sort of a limited location. They can sort of, have a clear goal. There's a lot of like horror, gruesome setups within there. But I think the way that this is done is just so unique. First and foremost, the actors in this thing are absolutely phenomenal. The 2 main ones that I want to draw attention to are David Hewlett, who many people may know from his turn as RODNEY McKay on Stargate Atlantis, one of my favorite characters in the entire Stargate franchise. And then we also have Nicole Dubois, who played Ezri Dax over on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, an actress who I really love and sadly have not seen in as many things as I would like. So seeing her pop up in this movie was certainly super exciting for me as a young little Trekkie who discovered this film. Like, oh my gosh, it's Nicole Dubois. So cast is phenomenal. I love the way that these characters sort of interplay off of each other, bounce off of each other. They definitely have conflicting personalities. You definitely get a lot of that horror movie infighting within this setting, but it also feels very claustrophobic, which really works to the characters. I mean, this movie, and this is part of what inspired me about this film, this movie essentially takes place all on one set. You're just in a cube the entire length of the movie up until potentially the end, and I won't spoil exactly where that goes. But you're essentially in this one set the whole time, and the creators of the movie made absolute masterful use of this limited set and just really have you just bouncing off of the different characters and the tension that is belied within this simple concept. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Not only that, but my little leftist person myself loves the themes within this movie. Obviously, you get the sort of horror movie tropes of like someone going mad, someone being more aggressive, the scientists trying to figure their way out, the sort of like serial killer type of trope, and I won't exactly spoil how that plays out, but I think it's really interesting. But there are also some really deep themes and ideas within this movie that at least touches upon around the idea of, again, without spoiling too much, around who built this cube, around what is the purpose of work, and how we are able to distance ourselves from the ramifications of our actions through things like capitalism, through things like money and distance and things like that. And again, it's hard for me to talk specifically about that without spoiling, so I will sort of like leave that for you to discover if you have not seen the movie. But I really think there are some really wonderful, I will say leftist themes in this film, but you don't necessarily have to take it as sort of a political thing. There is also just some good character building in there if you sort of want to leave politics out of my horror movie. Personally love politics in my horror movies, but it's there if you want to pick up, and I think there's a lot to run with in terms of that theme. I also think that, like I said, they make clever use of the setting. Like I said, there's different setups and different traps, and they equally have different tension. The movie, despite all taking place in one spot, never feels repetitive in any way, shape, or form. And I absolutely love it for that. I will say the only like major problem that I have with the film is it does sort of lean into the sort of autistic savant trope a little bit. One of the characters is clearly autistic and ends up being incredibly smart. Again, I won't spoil how that plays out. It is a little bit of a problematic trope. It's not the worst version of that trope that I've ever seen. There's been much worse versions of it than is in this movie, and I don't think this movie is overly problematic on the front, but it is a problem within the narrative of the film that I wish it had somewhat avoided, and is potentially made even worse by the implications of some of the sequels to this film that sort of influenced this movie. Again, without spoiling those, because I do like the sequels as well. But there's some implications made by the future movies in the series that sort of have interesting ramifications on this one, going back to it. There's definitely some issues with it, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But I kind of want to wrap out, like I said, sort of talking about why this movie was so influential to me at a young age. This movie was probably the first movie that I ever saw that was not like a big budget Hollywood film. That was not like something that I would have seen, on the marquee at a big movie theater. It was actually recommended to me by my English teacher at the time. Mr. Bryant, you are freaking awesome. I love you. You are probably one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life, and definitely one of my mentors. But he suggested this movie probably to my parents, my stepmother's definitely chagrin. But it sort of showed me that movies can be something different. They don't always have to be these big blockbustery films. Now that seems kind of obvious to me now, considering I'm a huge film buff. But back then, this was revelatory, that I could see something that took place in a limited location, with a limited budget, with actors that I really loved and adored, but who were not like the big name actors on things. Like David Hewlett and Nicole DeBoer, I love them as actors, but they're not marquee names. And to see them headline a film like this, honestly, was just super cool to sort of see like different people in these types of roles and getting to lead in these types of roles. And like I said, this movie just inspired me to be like, oh, this is what movies can be. And it's movies like this that, number one, probably influenced my love of horror to this day. I absolutely adore horror, but it also probably influenced why I love movies that focus much more on actors and limited locations. Not saying I don't love the big budget film and like a Marvel movie or things like that. I do love that, but when a movie can take place in one location and do such cool things with simple locations, like movies like, I think, Coherence or The Invitation or The Man from Earth, things like that. Those are probably movies that I love more than anything else because they just are able to do so much with so little. And this movie was the thing that showed me that. And I don't make a joke about it, that this movie was probably one of the movies that influenced me to want to go into film, to want to be a creator, to want to make things, because I saw that not only was that accessible, but you could be creative in it. You could do something new with film that wasn't these big budget things all the time. And I'm not saying that this is the first movie to do that or the first movie ever to do that, but it definitely wasn't. But it was the first movie that I encountered that did that for me. But what I still love about it is that this movie still holds up. It really does hold up today. Like I said, there's a few problems here and there with the film, but I still think this is a like 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 horror movie. It definitely is in my top horror movies of all time, which is surprising for such a small indie film 20 years down the line, or 30 years down the line. I don't even exactly know the year it came out, but something along those lines. And I also would say that its sequels, Cube 2 Hypercube and Cube 0, are well worth checking out too. I personally like Cube 0 a little bit more. Cube 2 Hypercube gets a little bit weird for me, but I still enjoy it. Not as good. This is definitely the pinnacle of the three films, but they're all worthwhile. And I think do the most with that concept as you possibly could. I don't think there's any more need for more films after those. I think they sort of did the concept to death and don't need to return to it. But overall, I think Cube is a truly fantastic work and easily one of my favorite horror movies of all time, not only for personal reasons, but I think it just truly stands up. as a really good horror movie. But I would love to hear all of your thoughts about Cube. Did you watch Cube? Did you like Cube? Did you think it was a good movie? Do you think it's a terrible movie? Is David Hewlett an underappreciated actor? I definitely think he is, because Rodney McKay, I need to do a whole video on Rodney McKay at some point, because Rodney frickin' McKay is amazing. So I'd love to hear all of that down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget I have a Patreon that you can help me out on as well. But beyond all of that, and also if you join the Patreon, I have a Discord server on Patreon that allows you to sort of talk with other people about my Jessie Recommends series and sort of maybe do watch-alongs, things like that. But beyond all of that, I thank you so much for just stopping by. I encouraged you to check out a film that you may not have heard of, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, you are my patrons. You are so awesome. So here are your names: Catherine Lambeth, Eli Berg Moss, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Miranda Janelle, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Camille T, Randy Thompson, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Rick Osborne, Roar, Ish the Mad, Piston Twisted Garage, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Carmen Olson, William Stewart, Amanda Ronya, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Andrew Jorgensen, BBD, Jason Knott, Maeve, saying it twice because I can, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Nathan Steele, Skylar Gray, Lily, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Bush, Jane Packard, Geek Filter, Mari Neckard, Jacob Tovar, Polymenia, Celestial Dawn, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam Din, Mark the Edge, Corey Honkanen, and Vale the Pale Dunn, Lysa, W. Randy Eady, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, and finally, Michael Hardy. I am sorry for that, but seriously, thank you so much, patrons. You really mean the world to me, and you really are changing my life, even if I may have changed your life for the worst with my singing. Thank you so much for all of your support.